Prague, Czech Republic. She should be on her honeymoon, which definitely would not have included a wild night out at Prague's hippest nightclub, Music Club Lucerna, located a 10-minute walk from beautiful Old Town Square. The bar was originally a theater, built in the early 20th century, and it still had the jutting front stage and massive balcony. And tonight, the music pulsed out into the dark, rain-slicked street, shiny with bright lamplights under a star-strewn sky. Yes, a night for romance. Maybe, hopefully, if this night went the way of her wildest dreams. RJ had managed the entire walk in a pair of spike heels, a miniskirt, a gold sequined vest, and a hot, long auburn wig. She wasn't sure why she'd opted for the disguise, but if York wasn't indeed alive and waiting for her at said club, then she didn't want his killer to know he'd been made. At least not until she could figure out his identity. And from there, she'd put his fate in the hands of her friend Roy. He left them shortly after York's disappearance, saying he had an emergency in the States. Whatever that meant. Roy did things that she didn't want to think about. Maybe none of them were sinister or dark. Maybe that was just her crazy imagination. But once she got the information on York's killer, Roy would know what to do with it. And then York's murderer might find justice. Except York wasn't dead. No, really, he wasn't dead. RJ knew it in her heart.
The place is already hopping.
The words issued from Ziggy, her voice close to RJ's ear, and she practically shouted them over Corona singing The Rhythm of the Night. Oh, goody, they'd happened upon 90s night. A DJ stood on the stage, surrounded by techno gear, wearing headphones, one of the earpieces propped behind his ear as he bopped and sang along. On the floor in front of the stage, bodies gyrated and danced hard, their sweat seasoning the air, along with the bitter redolence of too many spilled mixed drinks.
"Do you see York?"
RJ shouted back. Even the balcony was packed, partiers leaning over the edge, fists pumping and singing. Ziggy shook her head. Her short black dress, high heel over-the-knee boots, her long, silky black hair tied up in a high ponytail, light brown skin, and tall, lean body, the woman seemed at ease in the place. Then again, she was a cohort of Roy's, who had practically materialized out of the darkness a few weeks ago in Heidelberg, Germany, saving RJ's life.
"I'm going to look around."
Ziggy motioned her intent with her finger, circling above her head.
"You keep your eye trained for Risa."
She pointed toward the long silver bar that ran under the length of the balcony. Right. Risa Yukachova, the leader of the Odin, a.k.a. the Orphans, a super-secret, super-lethal group of assassins who were behind the attempt on York's life. She bit back acid pooling in the back of her throat. This had to work. York had even thrown down the plan before he'd chased a killer off a cliff 10 days ago. Fulfill the contract, get paid, and trace the money back to the source. The contract he'd been referring to was the one on his life, of course. It had seemed like a brilliant idea a week ago, when York was alive and breathing and bigger than life. Maybe not quite so brilliant now, 10 long days later. 10 days that she'd woken up every morning in disbelief as she waited for her cell phone to ring. She had no other plan but this one, but she'd gotten it into her head that York was waiting for her to do exactly as she'd said. So she'd confirmed his kill, manufactured a bulletin that she spread through Interpol and onto the internet, including a picture of a dead York, thank you, Photoshop. And then she waited. Now, as her heart beat, she could almost hear him, her name whispered deep inside. RJ. She even looked up at the crowd on the balcony, as if the man she loved might be hidden in the shadows. Nothing, and she was living on dreams.